Previously on the American Justice Podcast.
He beat the snot out of me too. I didn't have to get tough. Anyway, so he beat the snot out of me too because we had horse whips too. And he did that.
The buggy whips? What you call it, is a buggy whip.
So he did that. And crazy stuff. Or locked me in the house for hours and hours and hours and hours.
There is an epidemic in America's criminal justice system. The prosecution and conviction of innocent people for crimes they did not commit. Welcome to American Justice. The American Justice Podcast Army works to free men and women wronged by the criminal justice system. It's not only about the innocent who have been imprisoned, but also the victims of the crimes as well. No one deserves justice more than them. And now, here's your host, Scott Poggensee.
Hello, American Justice Army. Welcome back to your podcast. Last week, we discussed the mental health issues of Brandon's sister, Charla Woodruff. If you're joining us for the very first time, I'd like to recommend that you return to our previous episodes and bring yourself up to speed on the Brandon Woodruff capital murder case. This week, we're going to discuss the first interview Charla gave to the investigators. Well, we're going to discuss part of it. There's so much to this interview that it would be impossible to do it in one episode. So I'll warn you up front. This is going to spill into another episode. But don't worry, I'll do my best to keep it interesting for you. I mean, that's my job, isn't it? We're actually going to cover both of Charla's on-camera interviews conducted by Ranger Collins. The initial one, which we'll discuss now, was recorded right before her brother Brandon's interrogation on that fateful Sunday, October 23rd. It's plain to see that this interview is very incoherent. It jumps around all over the place like a Quentin Tarantino film gone horribly wrong. Or terribly right. I mean, isn't that the point of a Quentin Tarantino film?
And you will know my name is the Lord when I lay my vengeance upon thee.
After entering the interview room, Charla sat down across the table from Ranger Collins and Hunt County investigator Terry Jones. It's easy to see in the interview footage that Ranger Collins was all dudded up in stereotypical fashion. Cowboy hat, gun on the hip, huge Texas-sized belt buckle, the whole 9 yards. This was a real Texas lawman. Or at least, that's what his costume insinuated. Other than the outfit, Walker Texas Ranger excluded, the only real difference in the actions of this Texas lawman and a real investigator would be that Ranger Collins had this case wrapped up in only 5 days. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that it's impossible to wrap up a capital murder case in that amount of time. If you have DNA with the suspect's blood, or a few eyewitnesses, or possibly the murder weapon in the suspect's car, or maybe even a videotape showing the perpetrator coming out of the room where the murder just occurred. You know, physical evidence. I guess in that case, it would be possible to wrap up your investigation rather quickly. The only problem here is, there would be none of that. To this day, none of that. The overall takeaway from the first interview is that Charla didn't have a clue in regards to what was happening or who could have been responsible for such atrocities against her parents. And, more than anything at all, was trying her best to point fingers at anyone and everyone except her brother Brandon. The finger even pointed directly at, you guessed it, Brandon's shit-kicker friend, Mike Etherington. Her personal list of other potential suspects ranged all the way from drug dealers down the street to home dude and home girl to members of the local chapter of the Ku Klux Klan. I mean, fiction can be fun, right? 3 days later, she completed a full about face when back in the Ranger Collins hot seat. This time, the only suspect her finger sought out was her only sibling, Brandon. What changed within that 3-day period to lead her down this singular pathway is probably one of the biggest mysteries of this entire case. One day, Brandon was the typical rivaling sibling that didn't have a mean bone in his body. As you'll see when we get to the second interview, he's the biggest liar known to man. And if some relevant case-breaking information was uncovered during those 3 days, why did she insist on waiting until the next scheduled interview to bring it to light? So many burning questions in this case that'll keep you up at night, fearing for your life at the hands of those sworn to keep our nightmares at bay. But I digress. Back to Charla's first interview. Ranger Collins began his questioning with the same tactics he employed in all of them. Even though Hunt County Sheriff's Office investigator Terry Jones was present, Collins took the lead and asked a vast majority of the questions. Ranger Collins would claim later on in the trial that he was not the lead investigator in the Woodruff murder case. Yet he had well over 50 times more documentation than any other investigator assigned to this case. If Collins indeed was not the lead investigator assigned to the Woodruff case, then who was, and why weren't they in the habit of filing reports? He quickly collected pertinent contact information from the interviewee in case the need arose to contact her sometime down the road. Charla graciously volunteered the information: name, date of birth, social security number, phone numbers, etc. You know, the usual stuff. Ranger Collins then went on to express his heartfelt condolences for the loss of her parents and proceeded to the meat of the interview. Charla began her tirade of forthcoming information by speaking about the number of times she'd personally stayed in her parents' new Royce City house. Remember, she was away at college in Arkansas, and the family had acquired a new home a few miles down the road from their longtime house in Heath Rockwall area. She stated she'd been there 3 times prior to the murders, the last being over Labor Day weekend, 6 weeks prior to the current interview. She came to visit her parents over Labor Day so that they could meet her newest boyfriend, who she had met on a recent cruise vacation. Although the man lived over 1,000 miles away in North Carolina, she swore they were determined to make their long-distance relationship work. After all, they were back on dry land now, and the man had chosen not to voluntarily run away. Sounds reasonable, right? Surely, as long as she kept those mental health records we discussed in last week's episode out of his sight, all would proceed as planned. And a quick inspection of her phone records definitely shows they were in love. Well, they talked a lot. Next, she began explaining something to Ranger Collins and Investigator Jones that immediately caught the two of them off guard. Charla informed both of them that her father was totally obsessed with Dolly Parton. So much so that he even had an entire room in his Heath, Texas house dedicated to Dolly Parton memorabilia. We'll put photographs of that room up on the AmericanJusticePodcast.com website for you to see for yourself. It's actually quite impressive. I've talked to many people about Dennis, and his love for his divas, especially Dolly, almost always comes up. Here's a little clip from when I interviewed Dennis's Aunt Diane and his mom Bonnie. Diane describes Dennis's love of Dolly Parton this way.
Well, Dennis he loved Dolly Parton. And I remember one time we went to the fair and she was there and he got to meet her. And that was the thrill of his life to get to meet Dolly Parton.
The next set of questions coming from Ranger Collins, still reeling from the recent Dolly Parton revelation, concerned the spare bedroom at the Woodruff's new home in Roy City. He'd noticed there was a pair of pants, a rather large pair of women's pants, placed on the bed in the spare bedroom. You see, Dennis was a rather large man. At the time of his death, he was 6 feet tall and 375 pounds. Logically, it made Ranger Collins question whether or not Dennis and Norma were potentially having marital issues, since the larger clothing was discovered anywhere other than his own bedroom. Charla insisted that Dennis and Norma's relationship was completely fine. She didn't believe they had any problems at all. She insisted that if they did, they would have told her. She went on to explain that Dennis had been diagnosed with sleep apnea and required an increased amount of pillows when sleeping. According to her belief, if there was only one pillow on the bed in the spare bedroom, and that bed was made up, then that would mean that her parents were not sleeping in separate bedrooms. She did not, however, have any explanation for the pair of women's pants in the spare bedroom. Ranger Collins went on without any further questioning about the pants and moved forward in the interview. I guess he just decided this was one question that wouldn't be answered. For now. Well, I hate to get ahead of myself, but this is a question that would never get answered. And now for the good stuff. Technically, it's the beginning of the strange stuff. Let's talk about the first of many enigmas to escape Charla's mouth during her interviews. She rambled and ranged from speaking openly about how she played both of her parents over the years to obtain whatever she wanted, and the first of many assertions that her father Dennis was physically abusive towards her. Now, just a bit of warning before I start playing Charla's clips from her interviews. The recording equipment back in 2005 was, let's just say, less than desirable. That, combined with the fact that Charla seemed to talk like a second grader trying to lie her way out of being late to class, did not make for the most favorable conditions when trying to put together an audio file. Trust me, guys, I did everything I could to amplify and clarify and make this clip even halfway decent for you to listen to. However, as you'll see, it's still not great. Here's what I'll do for you. If you're listening on YouTube, I'll put the closed captions up on the screen. If you're listening through the many podcast media players, I'll put the transcription in the description. However, either way, I am going to post the pages from the written transcript on our website, AmericanJusticePodcast.com, under the Case Info tab. That way, you can go back and look for yourself to read any words that you didn't understand. One last thing, just so you know what's going on, the loud voice you're going to hear is Ranger Collins. The other male voice you'll hear is Charla's makeshift attorney, Leroy Autry, telling Charla that he's her attorney and he cannot repeat what she says. And to his credit, Ranger Collins has to step in and actually tell her that he is not an attorney and he can repeat anything she says. Seems like maybe her lawyer should have said that Kind of makes you wonder what crackerjack machine Leroy got his law degree out of. I mean, I understand you're not a criminal defense attorney, but surely you had a class or two on it in law school. At the very least, you should tell her that these big bad lawmen are going to repeat everything you say. So don't say anything you don't want being broadcast in a courtroom, or a podcast for that matter. All right. Without further ado, here's the first clip where Charla is starting off the verbal volleyball match by making sure whatever she says doesn't leave that little room before she starts assassinating her loving parents' memories. Listen for yourself.
Did you not see eye to eye because your parents were controlling? You know, they didn't want you to date this particular person or hang out with this particular crowd or something? Or
Is this going to stay here and not go very far? Is that
what do you mean?
Like, this room is not leaving this room?
Well, it
we
depends,
can't
though.
repeat it. We're attorneys. We cannot tell it.
All right.
And before you go on, though, you need to know we're not attorneys, and it can be repeated, but
But
we're not going to go broadcast what you're telling us here. This is more to and you have to know we have to know as much about your parents and about the family relationships and all the things that go on.
My dad, whenever I was younger, had a very bad temper.
Mm.
Okay.
Huge temper. And it was bad enough, I guess, I don't know, but he was thinking so hard to where I had a belt line and then where the threads went.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And times where I had bruises where his hands were, like in the shape of his hands.
Okay.
And that's when we were younger. Well, by the time I got to the Lawrence house, I was like, getting older than 14. So this is, I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. But by then I was like being a stupid teenager and I was going to fight you back, and that's when things started hitting the fan, and...
They saw it as a sign of that you're not submitting to their authority as parents?
Yeah, but I was not about to, for however long I was, getting bruises left and right, and
All right, so are we talking abusive? That sounds borderline.
it was very borderline, and a lot of my friends' parents thought it was abuse.
Okay.
Okay.
Is this just your dad, or was your mom
Just my dad.
too?
I just want to make something perfectly clear here. I've had discussions with numerous people, well, over a dozen, who knew Dennis and Norma Woodruff very well. From close friends to family members who interacted with the two of them and their children on a daily basis. And not a single one of them ever mentioned hearing anything along the lines of any physical or mental abuse within the family. In fact, this would be the first time that Charla would ever tell anyone that her father was physically abusing her. Sure, there were several statements about her dad not letting her go to her friends' houses and those type of things upsetting her. Juvenile things that upset all of us immature, misunderstood children, but nothing at all about any physical abuse. Okay, I just want everyone to understand this. It's a very important point. In a room with Texas Ranger Jeffrey Collins and Hunt County Sheriff's Office investigator Terry Jones, and asking for reassurance that what she's about to say will never leave that room, she would utter phrases for the very first time which accused her father of physical abuse. With that said, the interview continues. Next up in Charla's big bag of surprises, she goes into more detail about her parents. Remember, this is coming from the mouth of a college girl who had not only just lost both of her parents a few days prior to this interview, but they were brutally murdered by being shot and stabbed. No, not losing them peacefully in their sleep or as a result of a sudden car wreck. murdered. Brutally murdered. Ranger Collins asked, quote, "What kind of parents were your parents to you?" Unquote. Charla responds, quote, "I'm not going to lie. I mean, I had a lot of problems growing up with them. A lot. In my freshman year in college, all of a sudden it was like, 'We're so proud of you.' And I was like, 'Proud of me? Now you're proud of me? What are you talking about? You know, proud of me now that I'm in college? I'm still the same person, you know. But now you're proud of me? Now you're driving up to? I mean, seriously. I'm 3 hours away, and then all of a sudden they went to every single game because I was in dance and I was in, you know." Unquote. It's easy to tell there's some long-harbored disgust for the family dynamic coming forward during this interview. Mix that with a documented mental history of violence, both towards herself and aimed towards others, and well, you get the idea. We're focusing on her words here. Unfortunately, her words are what makes my mind wander down the road of, well, I'm sure that if you've been listening to the other episodes from this season of the American Justice Podcast, and if you haven't, I strongly suggest that you do, you'll notice that I have a tendency to go off on a little bit of a personal tangent every once in a while. Not often, but sometimes, when I feel it's warranted. With that said, it's about time for one of those. I'm not sure about you, but to me, this has nothing to do with solving who murdered her parents. It only seems to be like she's painting her parents in a bad light. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, Scott, when you're talking about your parents, you have to give the good and the bad and the ugly. And I would agree with that, but only in pertinent situations. If my parents were just brutally murdered, I'm not going to talk about how my mom really wished that I would settle down and have kids. It's just not relevant to the matter at hand, or at least what should be the matter at hand, finding the killers. I'm just not sure why all of this harbored aggression comes out when talking to law enforcement. She's not talking to a therapist. She's not on the psychiatrist's couch trying to sort out her life's issues so she can move on in life. She's there to talk and give information to these investigators that might help track down the ruthless, heartless monsters that just caused her parents to go from living, breathing human beings to lifeless, dead bodies. I know we haven't gotten there yet, but we will compare this to Brandon's account of his parents, and let me just tell you, they couldn't be at two further ends of the spectrum. Okay, I digress. Back to the interview. Now, do you recall earlier how Charla described in her own words how her father was so abusive to her all throughout her childhood? Well, in the very next breath of toxicity, she switches horses mainstream by telling Ranger Collins that she and her dad only ever had one physical confrontation. Just one. Moments before, it was a lifetime of abuse. Now, it's just one. Again, no one raised an eyebrow to the wishy-washy confession. Let's remember, Charla wasn't the easy target in this case.
What's the age difference between you and your brother?
13 months.
13 months. You're close, real close. Was you the problem child, or did he just have a hard time dealing with both children?
That was the thing. I really don't think I ever did anything wrong, and I will still tell you right now.
But you're the oldest.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm the oldest, all right? And I've got 3 kids, and I'm harder on my oldest, and I don't understand why. I really don't understand why, but I expect more out of my oldest than the other 2, and that's not fair, and I know it's not fair. But, you know, I was the oldest and it was done to me like that, and you were the oldest and, you know, maybe it was done to you like that too, so.
So I really honestly don't think I would. I mean, some things, okay, maybe, but
Not to warrant bruises, though, is what you're saying.
yeah. And, but, okay. So I think whenever I hit, 14 plus, whenever I moved into Lawrence house, that's when I started getting more hard-headed and more, I'm not going to take this,
Did you fight back? Were physical confrontation
No.
fight back, or
We
was it?
had one physical confrontation, and I'll tell you what happened. My dad, the way you see him now, is after he's had bariatric surgery. Whenever he went in to have bariatric surgery, if I remember correctly, he was 493.
Okay.
All right. So I think I was about 16, maybe younger. And the thing is my mom had told me that if I got to the point where I couldn't handle it anymore, to let them know and I could leave.
Handle what was going on, what you felt
any
like the abuse or arguments. Okay.
Arguments, to get to where I couldn't handle anything. Okay. You're gonna laugh. So I was like ready to leave, and I called my friend, and she said, "Come get me." Her and my mom. Maybe we were 15 because she couldn't drive yet. Maybe I was 15 because she couldn't drive. Her and my mom would come get me. So they came and got me. They're on their way, and my dad's like, "You're not going anywhere." So he was like, stood at the end of the hall, and I was like, "I'm leaving." So my bedroom was at the very end of the hallway. Have you been in the Lawrence house?
No, I haven't.
Okay. My bedroom was the very end of the hallway, and the front door is I don't know. So I just ran and I charged at him, but I just bounced off his belly and I hit the floor.
Okay.
And that was the end of our physical confrontation.
Okay. He didn't push you down or anything like that? You just kind of bounced off?
But they called the cops on me.
Did they?
Yeah.
Okay, and were you taken in or filed on or anything?
So the cops said that I didn't do anything wrong.
Okay.
They looked at me and then looked at him and said,
Okay.
if you're going to let her go, and if not, just let her go to bed. And that's all they said.
Okay. All right.
So I guess I just don't get it. Even after listening to that clip, I can't comprehend the claims being made. Did she only have one physical confrontation? Or was her dad so abusive on a constant basis that he would leave belt marks on her legs? I can't possibly be the only one with questions up until this point. I'll just leave that right there. The next victim of her character assassination in this diatribe is the relationship between her and her brother. Now, not only did her dad beat the living hell out of her, but she now chose to throw her brother underneath the bus as well in regards to how abusive he was towards her. Both investigators bit. Hook, line, and sinker. Fish always go for the tastier, shinier bait, right? Right now, she was definitely the most illuminated morsel in the entire lake.
He beat the snot out of me too. I know how to get tough. Anyway, so he beat the snot out of me too because we had horse whips too. And he did that and crazy stuff, or locked me in the house for hours and hours and hours and hours. But every time I would try to walk off and go to a friend's house, he'd be like, "Well, what if Dad calls? What if Dad calls? You can get in trouble. I'm going to tell him you're not here." So then I would literally have to sit outside in the heat and the sun and just wait for him, Anyway. So, that was me. But he did that. But my parents never believed me about it until one day, I'd call my mom for something, and I didn't hang up the phone on the way. And on accident, it was a pure accident. I don't know, somebody upstairs was thinking about me, I guess. And then he came in and did all the horsewhip thing, and all you heard was just me screaming bloody murder, and I locked myself in.
They never seen the marks from the whips.
They didn't believe me. and I locked myself in the bathroom. And we had pots and pans and cookie sheets and whatever else. Honestly, we didn't play.
Now, remember, all throughout the notes from that family member, not once did she describe having a physically abusive relationship with her brother Brandon. She did say that they had a normal sibling rivalry, but nothing to the extent she's now conveying to the Texas lawmen. Also, notice that Investigator Jones asks Charla if her parents ever saw the bruises from Brandon's horsewhipping her. When she didn't answer, they just kept on going like nothing happened. Not once did they ever challenge any of the information Charla was feeding them. She then claims that her parents let Brandon, quote, hear it after he denied it. I'm sorry, were cell phone conversation recorders commonplace back in the mid-2000s? Hell, I can't even get my phone to record a conversation reliably now. But again, that was not challenged, and it was just accepted as fact. After all, they were really plotting their interrogation against Brandon, who was next in the hot seat. And anything Charla could tell them about him and his temper just fed into their opinion they had already formed about Brandon by this point. All right, next, Ranger Collins wants to know if there's any emotional abuse from her parents or her brother. I mean, after all, he just heard an earful about the physical abuse coming from her brother and her dad. Of course, she's happy to tell them whatever they're asking, but as you'll see, it comes right back to her soon enough. Now, I want you to pay very close attention to this. Ranger Collins asks the question, quote, was there emotional abuse from your parents towards you or towards your brother or between you and your brother, end quote. After telling Ranger Collins that her brother was emotionally abusive to her, she immediately starts in with her cousin dying in a car wreck and how she tried to kill herself. I'm not sure how that has anything to do with the question at hand, but it sure does seem to come back to her pretty quickly.
Boy, and after that, hearing that, I almost even hate to ask the question, but I've got to. We've talked about borderline physical abuse, okay? Was there emotional abuse from your parents towards you or towards your brother or between you and your brother?
I think maybe when I was younger, my brother did a lot of mental stuff to me. Just with the playing head games with me, more or less. But I was the one stupid enough to fall for him. Whenever I got smart enough and realized I didn't have to fall for him,
Then there wasn't that issue anymore.
Right. Whenever I outsmarted him and realized I didn't have to do it. Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. Okay, sorry to interrupt.
So then that was taken care of.
What about from your parents directed towards you?
I'm not really one to deal with death very well. And my cousin died when I was 11. And he was 16 and he got in a car wreck. And from then on I was very messed up. And I tried to kill myself when I was 14.
How did you try to kill yourself?
With a gun. But I messed up. And I messed up the gun.
Okay, so you never actually got her shot off or anything like that?
The bullet ended up turning like this.
Did you get help?
Right after that, yeah. I got put on. I've been on antidepressants on and off, pretty much for a while.
Does that help?
Yes.
Okay.
So I had another bad thing. My dad was real bad, I guess, between all, what onset that is, my family is really important to me. Mm-hmm. So important to me, I can't even tell you how much they mean to me. What onset that incident is my parents told me they weren't going to go to Easter. So my parents, we were real busy moving into this house and stuff, and they had a lot of other things they had to do. And if I remember correctly, it was like a work, or, I mean, it was something, and they were outside building a fence that day, and they had some stuff, and I'm not real good handyman outside.
Right.
So I was to clean up the inside of the house, and they were building a fence outside. And I was just very upset that the next day was Easter and I was not going to be with my family. And so that was very upsetting.
And where did you get the gun to do
In the
that?
house. But my dad got rid of it very quickly.
So it was your dad's?
Yes.
Okay.
He got rid of it very quickly, and he has never owned one.
Well, let me ask, how did he find out? Because if it didn't happen, how did he find out?
I told my mom.
Pay real close attention to Charla saying that her dad got rid of the gun real quick after she tried to kill herself. That point will actually come up in a significant way during the trial, when Brandon's defense attorney expertly cross-examines Charla on the stand. Quick spoiler alert, it wouldn't be the first time, or the only time, that Catherine Ferguson would impeach Charla's testimony. Oops, sorry. Okay, moving on. The next subject Charla brings up is her medical diagnosis for pseudo seizures. She explains to the investigators that she faints when she gets really upset. In the accommodating fashion they've been displaying so far, they explain to her that sometimes the body just gets so stressed out it has to give out.
Things from there went rocky with my parents. We had a lot of arguments. They went to a lot of football games, but then again, not a lot. My dad had to pick me up from school a lot. He did that, because I didn't drive at all during high school. I didn't have my license until after I graduated.
Is there a reason for that? Or?
I actually had, I faint when I get really upset.
Okay.
Which,
Like a seizure type of thing? Okay.
So, I do that. But at the time they didn't know what was going on with me. So at the time of my permit and stuff, like when I was 15, 16, trying to do all that, they had to put that on hold, and you have to go for a year without doing any of that to get your permit and your license.
Now, did you have to get put on any medication or anything for that? So it's not like a seizure or something. It's just.
It was like a little seizure, but it was like what they call psychosomatic, like when your body that's its way to out.
Okay.
Like,
It's the stress that's building up in your body, and your body doesn't know how to handle it anymore, and the body just shuts down. Is basically what's happening.
I'm sorry. I didn't realize that medical degrees were also handed out at the police academy. And as I'm sure you'll remember from last week, the doctors seemed to disagree with Ranger Collins. Charla then starts telling Ranger Collins that she really only tried to kill herself once because of her dad. The other 2 times were because of boy problems. Here she is telling Ranger Collins about the guy she dated when she was 15, named James, that made her try to kill herself.
We were only together for like 3 months, but we were friends before that, and we didn't talk
And what about after that?
We didn't talk for, I'm about to tell you something real crazy happened. We broke up, and the only thing I'm crazy. Well, during the time we were together, I actually tried to kill myself once because of my dad. And
in that time, how did you? By trying to cut your wrist?
And he found out about that. He wasn't happy.
Who, James or your dad?
James.
Okay.
And my mom, I think, knew, but she asked me what happened. And I told her I was jumping a fence, which I climb over. I don't know how many fences anyway, because I'm just a little country kid, and that's what I do. And then after that, after me and James broke up, like, he was my first, like, little love thing, you know. we broke up, and we were only together for like 3 months, but I was 15, and I was like, and I OD'd on a bunch of medicine. That was the last time I tried to kill myself. I only did it 3 times.
After the breakup?
Yeah, I only did it 3 times, to be honest.
Okay.
Okay, I want to play one more clip for you before we end this episode. After you listen to this clip, I'll insert one of my patent-pending Scott Poggensee personal opinions. Here you go.
My dad hit me up a lot, so I mean, it wasn't like it was a real bad deal, you know, like where he hated me, he was going to leave me at school or make me ride home with anybody else or anything. It was a difficult time, but I think the hardest time was probably like 14 to 16 probably was the most difficult time, but I was going through a lot, I think. And I think a lot of girls or kids, period, that's probably a hard time for them.
And it's hard for girls.
A hard time for them, period. And then for us to be just me, my situation, and then to have, I mean, just the way I deal with things, and then to have outside my dad doing, you know, but my dad didn't hit me at all my senior year.
Okay.
So that was it. And the last time he hit me was my junior year.
And earlier in the interview here, you said you kept yourself busy for a reason, and I think you said you'll get to that kind of.
That was fine.
That's why you kept yourself so busy
I
at
never
school?
wanted to be at my house.
You didn't want to be around you didn't want to be at your house because you didn't want to be around your parents.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, if you don't mind indulging me for just a minute, I want to ask you, my wonderful audience, to help me with something. Charla is in the interview room to accomplish 2 main goals. Who killed your parents? And are there any relationships out there between your parents and someone else that might give someone a motive to kill them? At this point, we are 57 minutes into the interview, and not once has she said anything about who could have killed them. Every single thing comes back to her. Now, sure, later on in the interview, she would bring up that infamous drug dealer or KKK member, but let's be honest. If you were in front of Ranger Collins talking to him about who could have killed or who would have a motivation for killing your parents, wouldn't you be focusing on that? Even when Ranger Collins tried to bring her off the subject of herself, she just got right back on the Charla Railroad. Now, as I have said in other episodes, I'm not trying to paint the picture that Charla had a hand in the murder of her parents, but something here just ain't right. Please, feel free to write in or call in and let me know if I'm off base here. Okay, rant over. Thanks for indulging me. On that note, we'll go ahead and end this episode. Thank you for sticking with me, good, faithful listeners. I promise everything you've heard up to this point is going somewhere. Next week, we'll discuss part 2 of Charla's interview with Ranger Collins as she sheds more personal insight on the case. Also in next week's episode, after we finish with Charla's first interview, we'll move on to Brandon's interrogation with Ranger Collins. Here's a small taste of that interrogation. And remember, always stay aware, stay strong, and get involved.
My aunt has been working with them for a long time and legal-wise, and she did tell me, she said, Brandon, I want you to be prepared. You were the last person to see your parents. I want you to be prepared. And I've had days to think about that, and you know what I'm saying, I've been prepared.
Right.
But at the same time, I've got a sister that I need to be taken care of, and that's what my dad would want me to do. And we've got stuff that we need to do, but I'm going to be here 100%. If I'm 35 years old and we still don't know who did this, I want to make sure this case is still open until we get whoever it is.
Right.
The American Justice Podcast is owned and copyrighted by Atua Productions, LLC. Your host is Scott Poggensee, and your writer is C. Derick Miller. The theme music for the American Justice Podcast has been created and composed by Josh DeRosa. Scripted and recorded episodes are published every Sunday morning, with follow-up Q&A episodes released on Fridays. Atua Productions aims for this to be an interactive podcast where you, the audience, has a great amount of influence on the content of our shows. You can interact with us in several ways. First, and most preferred, is you can leave us a voicemail. Our phone number is 972-942-0444. Be sure to leave your name and the city you're calling from, along with whether or not we can use your voice on the air. If Facebook is more your style, you can log on to our Facebook page at facebook.com/American Justice Podcast. Feel free to leave a comment, or you can message us on Messenger if you have a more pressing question or issue. If you would like to blog about the show, then you can log on to AmericanJusticePodcast.com and tell us what you think there. You can find many of the documents discussed in this episode there as well. If you are a tweeter, you can also voice your opinion on Twitter at AJusticePodcast. If you would like to support the show, you can do so in a couple different ways. First, consider visiting our Patreon page at patreon.com/AJPodcast. We have different levels of support that include t-shirts, guest call-in spots, and early access to our podcast and YouTube shows. Next, you can like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to get notifications of when we publish episodes. We would also very much appreciate it if you could give us a 5-star review. If you have any comments about the show, or more importantly, any tips on the case we're discussing, please call 972-942-0444 and leave us a message. After all, if the subject of our podcast is innocent, that means someone out there is guilty. American Justice Army? Let's find them.